Got something cool in the mail here, and it's definitely going to inspire the video that we are doing today. Shell bearing oil. It's called the Black Diamond bearing oil. Been using it for a long time. And then of course it's going to be followed by some shell bearings. Now specifically he sent me one for my TLR 22X4. I don't know if they're going to be available at the time of this video, but they will be available in the future if they're not currently. And then we also have another kit that we will be installing today for my 22 5.0, my TLR two-wheel drive car. And I'm going to walk you through how we install those. I really need to give a huge shout out to Kurt. Long time ago when I got back into it here a few years back, I started doing these YouTube videos, and fun fact, Kurt from Shell was the first guy to reach out and say, hey, your videos are really cool. Can I help you in any way? And he's been kind of supporting me ever since. He was a little bit sad when I went from AE to TLR, because he's very heavily involved and very knowledgeable in developing and finding setups to work with the AE guys. But he's still been trying to help me as much as he can on the TLR side of things, which is really cool. So if you guys are looking to support like a small business here in the United States that puts out some amazing products, definitely give Kurt and his Shell brand of products a good look, because his stuff is really good. You guys know that I use his titanium screws in my cars for a very long time, running his bearings in my cars, using his bearing oil, and I think I've used some of the other carbon goodies that he comes out with from time to time. So lots of great stuff. Links down below. Let's go ahead and jump into this bearing install right now. Okay, so here on my workbench we have my TLR 22 5.0, and it is partially torn apart because we're getting ready to put those bearings in. And I kind of jumped ahead just a little bit to save some time. So right here before me we have our gearbox, so we'll be putting in our gearbox bearings specifically in here. And this kit, like it indicates, we're going to put the super duper nice bearings in here. And because this doesn't really get as much dirt and grime in these areas, we can use those really nice high-end ceramic bearings for the gearbox. So we'll go ahead and crack this open. I already took all of the screws out, so it's just gonna pop right open. And then we'll start to see where these bearings are. Let me zoom in here so you guys can see a little bit closer. So diff is probably just gonna be sitting in there. Really easy to take out. Ooh. Pop it right out, and depending on your car, the bearing might stick to the diff or it might be stuck in your insert. Either way, we're just going to go ahead and pop this bearing off. Your other bearings are going to be located in this top shaft, in this little hole here. This guy right here. Sometimes they might be a little stubborn to pop out, but if you just flip it over, you can use the top shaft and just kind of encourage it to fall right out like so. And now this side we have removed all the bearings, so we can set that aside. Next we have the idler gear, and we're just going to take this pin off. Yours might be stuck on the diff case insert. If so, you could just leave it there, or you can pop it out, push it aside. I like to grab a little hex wrench just to get in there and just kind of gently pop these out. You don't need a tremendous amount of force. This is officially the longest this has ever taken, of course, when I'm making a video. And there you go. Take both the bearings out of that guy, set that aside. We have this bearing here, slides right off. And so now there are no bearings sitting on here, so we can set our gear diff aside. So then we still have these bearings here in the case. This guy, because you can't push through on the other side, you might just have to kind of get a little aggressive and just kind of like tap it on the workbench. So clear a nice little area out here. And let's see if we can get this guy to pop out. it started to come out just a little bit. So I'm gonna see if I can get this hex wrench in here and gently coax it out. Don't put too much pressure. Sometimes if you just like walk it back and forth on each side. And then voila. So now we've gotten all the bearings out of the diff case. As you can see, we are using a TLR 22 5.0 Elite Hybrid Ceramic Pro Set. So, and then right there in the indicator, it says that we have 6 of the ceramic and 14 of the Onyx Pro bearings. If you go on the website to see the description of this, basically we're putting the ceramics in the gearbox, like indicated here. Puts a nice little sticker on there so it's easy to see and understand. Ceramic gearbox. And then the rest of them are going to be a chrome plated or chrome treated, I don't know what the correct terminology would be there, versus a stainless treatment bearing. So that means that they're going to be even more resistant to things like moisture and just rust and corrosion, that sort of stuff. So it's going to be a nice upgrade from the kit bearings. Here, see if I can show you guys the difference. So you can see here, this is a kit bearing and it has rubber shields on both sides. Let me see if I can flip this guy over. Rubber sided. This has metal sides on both sides. So it's definitely going to be a more precision, freer spinning bearing. And like the package indicates, they are ceramic style bearings. So that's going to be a nice upgrade for our gearbox at getting some drivetrain efficiency. It's as easy as putting all the bearings back where we've just pulled out the other ones. Pop that one down in there. You can leave the top shaft in. And the idler gear, you can just press them in like so. I like to push the idler pulley gear shaft, I don't know what it's called, and then drop that in place like so. Press this little guy right in there, make sure he's seated all the way in, nice and flush. Good to go there. And then I like to push the bearings into the inserts, so you can see the insert's already in there. We're not changing anything there. So just press it in, easy peasy. Take your other bearing, press it into the other side. Okay, and just kind of like a nice little side note tip, when I'm putting these back together, I just like to make sure that all of my inserts are still going in the correct direction, because it's a little bit of a pain in the butt if you put something back together incorrectly, you gotta take it all apart again. So real quick, you just make sure that your diff inserts are the same, and then for the TLR, making sure that your idler pulley shaft inserts are the same as well, which I've already done and mine are good to go. So let's go ahead and drop the diff back in. Voila! Your diff bearings are in and ready to go. So this will be ready to be screwed back together, and then we'll go ahead and put it back in the car once we're putting it all back together. So next up, we're going to be installing some of the bearings in the driveline. So we're going to be putting some in the front hubs and the rear hubs. Now you technically don't have to take the rear hub assembly out. For the sake of this video and making it easier for me, I'm going to go ahead and remove it. It's just going to be taking off these two nuts, taking the hinge pin out, and then this assembly will come out. So just get your nut drivers, one on each side. And then depending on your vehicle, if you have the TLR, you're gonna have some washers in here. So what I like to do is just hold my hand right underneath as I slide this out so that I don't lose those washers. Here's your rear hub carrier assembly. So we'll set this aside. These are those two little washers I was talking about. I know that mine had these two little guys in the rear, and then this guy was in the front. So I just want to make sure that I remember that when I go to put it back together. Taking this guy apart is pretty simple. We have a little set screw here in the hex. Just grab my MIP wrench. Just a couple turns there to back it off. We don't need to take the screw all the way out. And then, so there's your hex, set that aside. And then take this little drive pin out. Don't lose it. Set it aside. And then we're going to be taking these two bearings out. So go ahead and pop this axle out. Now, depending on your vehicle, sometimes I have experienced that this will have the larger bearing stuck to it. And when that happens, you kind of have to get creative with like a vise or some sort of setup where you can hold the bearing. If it looks like this when you pop it out, there's a bearing that's stuck to your axle. This happens a lot when you run outdoors and there's just a little bit of moisture that gets on those two surfaces, and it just creates a nice little bit of corrosion, and then it's like stuck. So what you have to do is kind of prop this up so that you set like a pair of pliers or some sort of vise, and then you can kind of gently, usually the bearing is toast after you have to do this, but then you punch it out on this side. Just kind of like tap this with like a hammer or some sort of nice heavy object, and then you can get this bearing to come off. But either way, got to get this bearing off of this axle. Hopefully you don't find yourself in that situation. If you find yourself in this situation, we just have a bearing here and a bearing here. Hex driver, and I like to push the small one out first, gently, and it should pop right out. Same thing on the other side, pop it right out. If you're doing them both at the same time, make sure that you know which one is left and which one is right, or like me, you can just do them one at a time and then you know exactly which one goes where. So, as you can see, kit bearings with the rubber shields, shell bearings with the metal shields. So these have the chrome treatment, so it's going to have a nice resistance to corrosion compared to the kit bearings, and they're going to have a little bit better rolling resistance or lower rolling resistance, so you are going to gain a little bit of speed out of this upgrade here as well. Installation is going to be just as easy as before. Take the bearing and just go ahead and press it in like so. Shouldn't require a tremendous amount of force, should just go right in. Other side, press it in and make sure they're nice and flush. And then you just reverse the order of operation here on the axle. Take the axle. So if you have trouble putting this axle into your hub assembly, it's probably because the little drive pin that holds the dog bone to the axle isn't seated flush. So just kind of make sure that all sits flush, and then it should just slide right in and then look just like so. So we'll go ahead and put our little hex pin in. Slide your hex back on. Go ahead and tighten your hex drive back up. Nothing crazy, just keep it in place. And then your new bearing and hub assembly is good to go. I always give it a good spin just to make sure that everything is seated correctly and it spins freely. So good to go. For the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and move on to the front axle and swap those bearings out. Your vehicle might be different, but on the TLR, it has the smaller nut here. Just use your little hex wrench. And then the bottom pin has a little hex drive in it right there. So we'll go ahead and unscrew this. And this one, just like the rear, does have some washers. So make sure that these guys don't go flying when you take it out. Mine are all on one side because I have it in a carpet configuration. So I just kind of hold them with my thumb as I pull this pin out. And then now your knuckle assembly is going to come apart. And you should have 4 millimeters worth of spacing. And if yours is on the top and bottom, just make sure that you hold on to them and remember the configuration that they were in before we took it apart. So I went ahead and popped this guy off of the steering link so that I can hold on to it and work on it as I need. Now, little trick here, I like to just go ahead and use a wheel on the hex side so that then I can unscrew this screw right here. So no special tools needed, obviously. Get the hex in there, hold on to it, and then just go ahead and unscrew this guy. Now, if you built it according to the kit, this might have a little bit of tightness to it because you should thread lock it. And then just be aware that on the TLR, there are 2 little washers back there, so I just like to keep it all together. Set it down. Okay, now another thing to note when you're taking this guy apart. So one thing to note on the TLR is that you're going to have an adjustment here, and I just want you to be aware of it in case it falls apart and you weren't really ready for it. But if you take these out, it may or may not happen, but I just want you to be aware of it. There is a little spacer in between these 2 bearings, this little guy, so just make sure you don't lose it. Set it aside. Pull the axle out. And then if you have a bearing stuck in there, just use your hex wrench. Push it out like so. Okay. Now, what I was talking about is you see this little insert right here and how it's offset to where in this case it's pointed to this side and not that side. That's your trail adjustment on the TLR. And you can move this from this side to center to then you could flip it over this way. The center position is a completely different set of inserts, but I just want you to be aware of it in case these fall out, that you want to put them back in the way that you had them, or if you're making an adjustment, now would be the time to do so. So, grabbing our bearings, they should just pop right in like so. You got the bearing in one side, and then put that little washer in between 2 of them. Press this bearing in on the other side. Okay, looking good. And then this guy might need a little bit of finessing because you got to line up that little washer that's in the center. But shouldn't take too much effort, and then you can go ahead and get that guy looking like so. Screw with the washers. Now, because we did break the Loctite that we had on this screw, I am going to reapply a little bit of Loctite. You don't have to go crazy, just using the blue Loctite there. So that way we don't have our front axle assembly falling apart. So just holding everything with my hand to get it started. Get it set up. Now on the TLR, just make sure that these little washers, I normally have to hold it like this and then just kind of line up these washers so that everything is square, flush, etc. So hopefully you can see that everything is lined up and those washers aren't offset at all. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to tighten it down how it needs to be. And then to get everything snug, grabbing the wheel again. Holding the whole assembly. Get it tight. Nothing too crazy, but a nice little snug. And then just give it a nice spin. And we can see that everything is working. And that's how you put the bearings into your front axle. Now at this point, if you've done all of your gearbox and the axle bearings, you're going to be left with these guys. And these go into the steering assembly. Last but not least, we're going to just go ahead and install those remaining bearings of the kit into the steering assembly of our car. So this one's a little bit more cumbersome to get to because we got to take apart a little bit of stuff here so that we can access it, but it's not too bad. Let me punch in here so you guys can see where we're going to be going. So this guy, if you remember building the kit, we've got a number of bearings that are in this aluminum steering piece. And there's one on each side, and we got to get at those bearings and replace them. So let's go ahead and pop this apart and get going. So if my memory serves me correctly, we've got these two. Go ahead and take them completely out, set them aside. And then I think that we got to take off 2 screws that are holding down this front bulkhead assembly from the bottom. Let's see if that's gonna do it. Nice. There we go. Now it looks like we will have to go ahead and take the steering servo out so that we can go ahead and pull this out completely and get access to all of the bearings. Pop the steering servo ball cup out there and then just kind of like let it set just on the other side like so. All right, and now we can go ahead and slide these bad boys right off. So let me punch in so you guys can see what's going on. These 2 steering arms are just going to slide off of the steering post like so. And this is a good time to check and make sure that these things are still good and intact, nice and tight, because sometimes they can loosen or be broken and you might not even know it until you get to this point. So this is an item that I will check periodically just to make sure that it is intact and functioning as it should. Okay, so let's go ahead and pop some of these bearings out, shall we? Just using my hex driver to gently push on each side until it comes out. Don't need to bend anything since this is all going to be aluminum parts here. And so go ahead and press these in just like so. One on each side. Bada bing, bada boom. And then you just slide these bad boys right on. Just like so. And then you go ahead and reverse all the steps of us disassembling it to put it back together, and then you'll be good to go. So there you go. If you've never installed a bearing kit before, or if you're looking to see how I do it, that's how it's done. Pretty easy. You just take that stuff apart there, take your time, don't really force anything if you don't have to, so that everything, it just maintains the nice fit and finish that you need. As far as maintenance on these bearings, Kurt has a nice description on his website as to how you take care of these bearings. Definitely suggest using the Shell oil on them about once a month if you're racing 3 to 4 times a month. Cleaning these bearings is pretty simple. He suggests that you use a citrus-based cleaner so that it breaks down any oil or grease that's in there and pulls it out properly. If you use something else, sometimes it has a tendency to clump up, and it can actually hurt the bearings more than you're helping them, even though you're trying to clean them. So make sure you're using the right stuff. And like I said, he has a ton of good information on his website as to how you can do that and when you should do that. Me personally, I always check my car every race day. I just take the pinion off, give it a good spin. If everything looks good, sounds good, then it's usually good for the day. Once a month, I will take it out and get really detailed inspection on all four corners of the car and see if there's any bearings that need attention. And then basically just clean and oil as needed from there. Got all those links down in the description if you guys want to check that out, see if there's anything down there for you. He does make these bearing kits for the TLR cars, and then he does make them for the AE cars as well. You might have a couple other platforms, I'm not totally sure, but definitely check his website out and see what he's got for you. That's going to be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for checking me out. Support the channel, subscribe and like if you would like to. That definitely helps me out. And I will see you in the next one. Peace.